Second thoughts about the left really begins with a first doubt. For David and me, that first doubt came right after the war in Vietnam was over. Everything that we and our comrades wanted had taken place. The North was in the South, America was humiliated, and the world order had been upended. And then what happened? This heaven on earth that we had predicted would come into being, what was it? Well, it was a hell on earth. Tiger cages, boat people, more people killed in the first 3 years of the anti-communist peace than in all 13 years of the anti-communist war. That's what started our first doubts, and we naively expected the left would somehow accommodate these doubts and deal with them because, the left was internationalist, it was for truth. But what happened? We basically were told to shut our mouths, get in the dugout canoes, and start rowing toward the next utopia in the Horn of Africa, in Central America, wherever. So that set us on our way, and, that way is still continuing today. It was almost 30 years ago in 1987, almost 30 years ago actually in the month, that we staged what we called a Second Thoughts Conference in Washington, D.C. We gathered together the other kind of motley crew of our former comrades who had managed to extricate themselves from the left, people like Ronald Radosh, P.J. O'Rourke, Joshua Moravchik, Michael Medved, and others. And we had a sort of, kind of a meeting where Second Thoughts was the subject, and where we really talked, about what we had said and done in the 60s, the banal romance with revolutionary violence and third worldism, and about our desire to see America and all it stands for defeated. The conference was actually a fairly widely noted event. It's an agate-type footnote in the history of the Times now, but it was seen as a watershed moment for a moment or two. Until it happened, the 60s had been taken for how it presents itself. That is, that it was a time of youthful idealism and hopefulness that had been curdled, if at all, only because of America's homicidal nature and its hypocrisy. The Second Thoughts Conference challenged that myth and challenged even more the efforts of the leftover left of the 60s to reform in the 1980s and make sure that the communists won in El Salvador and Nicaragua, and that Ronald Reagan lost in his efforts to put the Soviet Union on the ash heap of history. The conference was a look back in anger and in guilt, and it was also a declaration of war. That war continues today. Second thoughters generically, have existed since there's a left. Second thoughters was a term that the press covering this conference used to describe us. There had been a previous generation to ours, Richard Wright, Stephen Spender, Ignacio Salone, André Gide, who'd also left the left, in their case during the height of Stalinism, and their testaments were published in that great book, The God That Failed. The political about-face of these two groups, their second thoughts, was framed by the large events of the time. In the case of The God That Failed intellectuals, the Soviet offensive after World War II that threatened Europe. In our case, the end game of the Cold War. But as you'll learn today, second thoughts about being a leftist, that moment, that first seminal moment, when some brave individual recognizes that all the self-congratulatory humanitarian rhetoric and moral preening of the left is actually a sinister smokescreen for political criminality. These moments are always with us. The left has always been, is now, and will always be a machine to manufacture second thoughts. The flowers it cannot keep from coming up through its concrete. More people than we know on the left have had doubts at one time or another, but almost all of them swallow them and trudge on, fearful of being excommunicated from what they've convinced themselves is the one true church of humanity and progress. But few of them honestly follow those first doubts and make a prison break. That prison break leads them toward clarity, and above all, toward a hard-won and often lonely freedom and autonomy. This makes the left hate them and places them in our debt. Second thoughts tend to appear when the left is confident on the move. In the 40s, in the 80s, and today, when it has placed freedom of speech itself, most fundamental thing in our body politic, under siege. Our panelists today are part of a new generation, a new wave of second thoughters that has risen to bear witness, and so is our moderator, Dave Rubin. Dave presides over the Rubin Report, a widely viewed online interview show filled with provocation, sprightly intelligence, and plain speaking, a show that is hard-hitting but also civil, which makes it unique in our fallen times. Dave was a one-time stand-up comic whose interest in humor probably led him inevitably toward politics. He was also a leftist who accepted the party line that only progressives cared about the downtrodden, that progressives were on the right side of history. But he gradually saw through this charade and recognized that the left gains power by cynically making its client racial and sexual minorities compete in an Olympiad of faux oppression, that the only speech the left supports is politically correct speech, which hates free speech itself, that it regards religion and individualism as roadblocks on the path to victory that must not only be removed but destroyed. Dave Rubin's Declaration of Independence from the Left appeared on YouTube and generated over 5 million views. In it, he tells, and I think you should have a look at your computer and find it, he tells why he's come to believe that the progressive left he once thought himself to be part of is actually a regressive left, whose road to power is based on manipulating its constituency of victim groups, making a new Leninism out of political correctness and silencing its critics by any means necessary, which is why he's one of the enemy's worst enemies today. Dave Rubin.
If you had ever told me that 5 years ago that I'd be sitting somewhere where they would call me an enemy of the left and I would get a group of people applauding, I don't know what I would tell you. Well, thank you guys for being here. I have to say, perhaps, there's so many great speakers here, obviously, this weekend, but I think in a certain way, if I could be so bold, this might actually be the most important panel of the week, because everything that we're going to talk about for the next hour or so is about changing minds. And that's exactly, I think, why all of you are here, why you want to hear about these ideas, why you guys donate your time and your money and your energies to this. I'm curious, I normally wouldn't start with a poll, but I feel pretty good about you guys. How many of you at one time were lefties? Yeah. Look at each other. Take that in, people. Yeah. I like get the sidecar. Yeah, I was a lefty. You were a lefty. Okay, we were all lefties. It's cool. I'm married to you. I didn't know that. Okay. That's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. You didn't boo each other. That's nice. But what that shows is flexibility of mind. And I think that's one of the things that the modern left, and perhaps, when I've had David Horowitz on my show, and, what sort of put me on the map was this PragerU video that I did that Peter referenced, and it was called Why I Left the Left. And I had David on my show a little bit after we posted that. And I was kind of feeling good about myself, and oh wow, this thing's really working, and Why I Left the Left, and people are digging it. And David just looked at me and he's like, I did that 40 years ago. Mr. Hotshot with the YouTube. Yeah. But what that shows is flexibility of the mind. And that is the most important thing that we have as a human. That is it. That is all that separates us from the animals, that you can get new information and learn how to think. And it's so interesting. I'll find people that'll catch me. Well, first off, I hope you guys aren't on Twitter. You seem like functional people with lives and jobs. Stay off Twitter would be my main advice. But I'll find people that'll find something that I said on Twitter 5 years ago when I was a progressive, and they'll go, you see, he's a flip-flopper. He's a flip-flopper. And it's like, no, I learned, and I changed, and I evolved, and that, I think, is what we're going to be doing mostly here. I want to just tell you a quick little anecdote that happened to me literally 3 days ago. I was in New York City, and one of my best childhood friends, I've known him my entire life. Our moms went to college together, so we go back before we were even born. He's a full-on lefty progressive, but we've managed to be friends all these years, and even through my sort of awakening, and he has major Trump derangement syndrome, he's genderless child, the whole thing. Please don't videotape this. And I met him at a bar, and I was sitting at the bar first, and he walked in, and immediately he threw a couple just sort of joking insults. How could I be at an Upper West Side bar with all these lefties? And then he said, "Oh, Dave, you've created such a great way of profiting off of all of this. What a great way of profiting." I mean, this is someone I've known my entire life, basically walking into a bar and within 30 seconds calling me a sellout. But then he said something that I think will really strike you guys. I said to him, Dave, his name's Dave also, I said, "Dave, do you think it's possible that I believe what I believe with as much honesty and passion as you believe what you believe?" And without even pausing, with no hesitation, he said, "No, that can't be." And really think about that, because I think a lot of you deal with this, a lot of us deal with this, that suddenly if you have a political awakening, if you suddenly think something a little bit different, they can't even believe that your mind could come up with those ideas. They can't believe that. And that is simply the most dangerous thing to deal with. I actually left the bar 10 minutes later, and to his credit, he has been calling me apologizing since. I haven't taken the calls, but we'll see what happens. I wanted to hang out with you guys and see first. Okay, I want to get to these panelists, and we'll talk a little bit more about all of our awakenings, but I thought the best way we could kick this thing off was a quick minute-and-a-half video on coming out in 2017.
Mom, Dad, I'm a lesbian. I like girls. Oh, sweetheart. We always knew. The bottom line, we just want our children to be happy, and we love you regardless. Great soul. Oh, thank you guys. Oh, also, I think I might be a conservative. I don't understand. I can't breathe. Hey, get that camera out of my wife's face. Guys, it's totally fine. It's okay. I just, think a little more conservatively. But sweetheart, you're black. Yeah. Look, it was a crazy election cycle, a lot of emotions. We're going to get you somebody to talk to, and you're going to work through this entire mess. No, Dad, this is who I am. What about Beyonce? Yeah, what about Beyonce? You like Beyonce, you love Beyonce. Beyonce is a liberal. What's going on? I still do. It's just as a general rule, I don't think the Billboard 100 should dictate my political alignments. And what about all of our Spanish-speaking friends? I knew there were too many Caucasian people in this neighborhood. Oh, that's good, honey. Mm-hmm. Make me the bad guy, Mrs. I can't live without those hedges. Or we're going to need those hedges when the neighbors find out that our daughter is in the KKK. What? Guys, this is getting completely out of hand. Mom, I'm still black, and I still like Hispanic people. I simply think that we should maybe put the economical future of this country ahead of the social issues. That is all. Sweetie, can you please just be gay?
I think What About Beyonce is the new Think About the Children, I'm pretty sure. All right, so obviously that was Candace Owens, who is sitting to my right here. Give it up for Candace.
Thank you.
So Candace, I think we should start with you because, James maybe beat you. I was going to say, who's the newest awakening here? Which is the newest one? You guys are pretty close, I think. But, you know, it's funny, when people ask me, how do I get guests on my show, I say, well, sometimes I reach out to people, but usually something just starts bubbling. Something starts bubbling online, and I start hearing about someone over and over and over again. And that was you about 3 months ago. Suddenly, there were like a 2-week span where everybody said, this is the girl to talk to. She gets it. She's doing it. She's putting herself out there. So tell me a little bit about what caused your red pill moment.
I go online by Red Pill Black. A lot of you guys had no idea who I was and heard, oh my God, you're Red Pill Black. So I am Candace Owens. People know me more as Red Pill Black. And I would say the Trump election, obviously, if you were paying any sorts of attention, you understood that the media was no longer trying to tell you anything. They were trying to sell you something. And what they really lost to me is they've changed what it means to be a black person. Black people are funny. And I was watching, as you guys were watching yourselves be painted as white nationalists and racist and sexist, which I understand you all are. We were being painted as whiny people who jump on top of cars and want handouts, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So the media wasn't just lying about people on the right. They were carefully selecting the narrative about people that were assuming they were on the left, like me, and it wasn't. Black people, I say all the time, if they are paying any type of attention to politics, they are conservative. The issue is that black people are too busy trying to feed mouths, trying to get off of welfare, trying to pay their bills, to be paying attention to politics, so they don't look up at all. And I just felt that I needed to assert myself in this fight, because to me it's a fight for the reputation of black people. They're creating a divide on both sides, and I quit my job and I went straight into the fire, and that was the first video I did, and it went viral.
Yeah, and to me what's particularly interesting about Candace and sort of this new generation of black conservatives, which are popping up all over the place, is this is the biggest danger to the left. I mean, they want their minorities oppressed, and this oppression Olympics, we want, if you look at people, what is prejudice? What is prejudice? Prejudice is prejudging. So if you look at Candace and think you know what she should think by the color of her skin, that is actual prejudice. So the irony here is that the people that spend all day calling all of you guys bigots and racists and all of these things, they are the ones that are actually prejudiced, and people like Candace are the ones that are gonna unpack that and stick it right to them, so it's a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
Tammy Bruce, tell us a little bit about your political awakening.
I'm sandwiched here, and what I really appreciate, my second thoughts began 25 years ago. I was the president of the National Organization for Women in Los Angeles on their national board. And as a gay woman, it was, it felt it was the right thing to do as a feminist. You go in, as you heard from Peter, I think most of us, and why there are so many ex-liberals, if you will, in this room, and why you're attracted to David Horowitz, is the understanding that our initial political interests, which is about personal freedom, individuality, independence, right? Those are the things that we were told liberalism, or the left, was about protecting us from all those who wanted to stop that. And my awakening was, I think as it would be for most people, and it's interesting, it's the kind of the same, whether it was 50 years ago or 20 or 3 weeks ago, is the hypocrisy of the left, is that if you're at all not in a coma, there's a recognition that you've been involved in a fraud. And so it's not that our politics change. It's that the awareness that we've been kind of tricked into a framework that actually does the opposite to the issues that are important to us. For me, when I was with NOW, and in a meeting, and Molly Yard at the time, who had been the president of NOW, Eleanor Smeal, women like that were my mentors in Los Angeles. And I'd noticed that we were doing things that were not necessarily helpful to the issues. And I actually mentioned this during a meeting, and I was told the only thing missing was a pat on the head, was that it was important sometimes to rub salt into the wound to make sure that we would always be here. In other words, to make sure there was always going to be a general problem. Now, silly me, of course, I was there to actually work us into not needing to exist as feminists, right? I wanted actual accomplishment. Not that I would say I was a mini Trump, but the business mentality of accomplishment and of doing something was important. That was one of the first things that occurred to me, was that this was a fraud, that there was no real intention of making a difference. Another issue was, and I'm pro-choice in the sense that I don't want government involved in our lives in that framework, right? At the same time, it's the 21st century, and there are, 24 birth control methods, and abortion is something that should not have to be a factor, right? But there was a clinic in LA where women were actually dying on the table. It was an infamous clinic, and the pro-lifers were out there protesting, and I suggested we join them, because what a great way to find common ground, because this was about saving women's lives. And I was told no, because that would hurt the issue. So for people, I think, certainly, as we might imagine, for those of you up here, imagine a world, though, with no email, no internet, and a world run by beepers. Remember that, everyone? I was running now with a voicemail machine in a closet, and with phone banks in order to reach people. So when you have this, and so you've got regular television, Fox was not invented, the whole different dynamic of what do you do when you realize that you don't fit? And there's no other way to get the word out. It's, I think, and this is what I think is important about David and Peter, is being able to move forward and recognize that there's an issue and have the bravery to move out. Because ultimately, and this is, as Peter noted as well, it can be very lonely, but if you're really invested in the nature of what you stand for, you can't stop. Now, that won't be everybody who's on the left. I think that there's a spark in those of you who've decided to step out, whether it's on Google or on the internet, or the ability then to quit your job and to move into new media and to do something remarkable. That's the unique thing that today's framework offers. For me, it was also the Clinton years. I worked on the '92 Clinton campaign, and 20 years coming back around, it was when all those women came out in front of the White House to defend Bill Clinton and his behavior. And that was another click about the fraud of the movement. And I think that what's important about this crowd and what's important about these individuals here today is the fact that there is now a foundation of a conversation in general in communications that allows an individual who might believe something's wrong to realize that they're not alone, that there is a place to land, that whether it's PragerU or other groups where it's like, well, wait a minute, these are other larger conversations that are important, and I could actually think differently, and that it's not something that's going to destroy my ability to make a difference. In fact, it'll add to it. It'll make it possible. So it's usually, I think, for those of us, a series of things with the realization that what we committed to was a fraud, the understanding that we can continue to do our work in some other framework that makes it easier to say, okay, well, maybe you start out by saying, I'm just not a liberal, or I'm agnostic, or I'm an independent. The important thing is, in all honesty, is to eventually get to the point where you're able to say you're a conservative. For two reasons. Some of you may disagree in this room. For two reasons. Because we've been indoctrinated to not say it, and if you still can't, we're still dealing with issues. But the fact of the matter is the conservative ideal, separate in my book from religious politics, the conservative ideal is the one that sets people free economically and with their minds. So it's two fronts. So I say conservative proudly, as President Reagan did, and as you do here in this room, and as Andrew Breitbart did, and certainly as David does. So thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
For the record, some of you probably know this. I actually do still consider myself a liberal. It's getting lonely. I consider myself a classical liberal, which, of course, at this point, one of the lines that I've been repeating a lot is that defending my liberal principles is becoming a conservative position. And I suspect...
You see, that's the trajectory. That's the truth. It's okay.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
We'll do this again next year. What do you
Yeah.
think? We'll repeat this. Quickly before I get to James, if I could ask the guys in the back, when I'm ready, we'll throw up my PragerU video. It's a 4-minute video. That'll be better than me explaining all this again. It's called Why I Left the Left on PragerU. I'm sure you guys can find it. James, who I introed last night. I really love James' story because, as you'll see in a second, as you saw last night, this is a thoughtful, decent, honest person who got thrust into the insanity like that. I mean, just like that, just by doing what Google told him to do. And the next thing you know, there are articles written about how he is racist and how he is a misogynist and a homophobe and all of this nonsense. So take it away, you racist, homophobe, misogynist. Tell us what happened to you. Where did it go?
I guess just personal history. I've always had libertarian leanings, but I had lived in liberal bubbles my entire life. Grad school and now Silicon Valley. And
if you want to hug him later, he lives in San Francisco. So. There was some inkling of just, okay, maybe conservatives are just, misinformed, or maybe what they're saying about they're all being racist is true, But once I really saw the reaction to what I wrote, which I felt was really reasonable, I did see that, the media narrative is really controlled by whoever's in power. And so while I don't necessarily call myself a conservative yet, I more went from libertarian to more of a centrist now, actually, because I feel like anywhere where you have the power, you will try to shut down whoever's trying to speak up. And we see this with the leftists in Silicon Valley, but also in the media. And so and also trying to confront some of the people that are against me, I've been forced to try to understand their point of view. And while I would say that a lot of what they're saying is just misinformation, it's still speaking to something internal to them. And so while maybe the politicians are not genuine, the individual liberals, as I'm sure you were genuine, right? And so I really think that the best way forward is to try to understand their perspective and really try to speak to their pain. And because so many of them feel like they're unheard. They may have some issue. Currently, for example, everyone seems to agree that we should have gender equality, which is what feminism is fighting for. But very few people now identify as feminists because the feminist movement seems to not speak for many women. And at least some theories for that are that who currently identify as feminists are just more masculine, and the female gender role doesn't work for them. So it just, if we just don't acknowledge that, then that'll only create extremists. So I feel like we need to be able to acknowledge that there is diversity of perspectives and to be able to address all of them. And that would help, red pill as many people as possible, I think, because, I think currently what's happening is only the extremes are being amplified, and both extremes are being intolerant and not accepting of people's truths, and that's hurting everyone. Real hate monger over here, right?
So one of the things, and this is what I focus on, obviously I inject humor, the left has been really good about winning the culture war. I find people on the right to be a little drier, more formal, and that's fine if you just want to exist in an echo chamber. If you really want to outreach and get people to wake up, particularly as it pertains to the black community, we run on humor. Humor is how people that are, forget just black, blue collar people, how you get through the day and you get through tough times is humor. And if you're not trying to win back, like I do Saturday Night Live type skits, right? But they're for us. It's funny because we're kind of always being portrayed as these awful people on TV, and there's nothing really on TV for people on the right to watch anymore. So the number one way that you can inject yourself, I think right now, is to remember that if you win the culture war, you will gain a lot of political advancement.
If I could add too, the difference for me was when I started doing talk radio in 1993, and the exposure. The liberals tend to keep themselves in bubbles, as James discussed. Is that it's wrong. You don't, you're kind of challenged, or if you associate with conservatives or people who are not liberals, especially on campus, right? I think for me, what made a big difference, and it took years, and this is what's important when you're toiling and you're at an event like this, and some of your major sponsors, and have been for years, thinking about, it takes long. It does take a long time. It'll take less long now that we've got new media. But one of the important things is to be vocal, is to be yourselves, is to also expand. It's not just liberals that can get into a bubble. Conservatives can as well, because look, there's now violence out there, right? It's a very interesting environment. But for me, it was getting to know conservatives in the safe environment of talk radio, in my case, finding out that how they had been described was a lie. That they weren't out to get me, they weren't out to put me in a camp, they didn't want to kill me. It was a revelation, and if I'd been lied to about that, what else had I been lied to about? So the first responsibility is personal, whether it's through culture, new media, challenging yourself to go where your grandkids or your kids are going, having conversations that might be difficult. That makes a huge difference so that people can feel like, well, wait a minute, you're not what has been described to me. And you might not even know at the time, but it builds and it makes things easier.
Yeah, I would add one other thing, which is stop giving these words power. I think that's really the most important part. If you're not racist, if you're not a bigot or a homophobe or an Islamophobe or any of these other made-up terms, then when someone calls you these things, it should actually have no meaning over you. And then you should be able to explain what you actually do believe. And if you really learn how to do that, and you can do it hopefully succinctly, and as Candace said, with a little bit of humor, you can win people over. But it takes time, because there is some serious brainwashing going around.
Yeah, and if I were to add one thing, it definitely takes a lot of time and it's hard, but if you want them to listen to you, then you have to listen to them. Because, if they see that they're being unheard, then they will just shut off.
Yes, thank you. My name is David, and I'm a conservative.
Hi, David.
Thank you.
Hi, David.
I'd like to ask the panel if they agree with the following statement. Nothing is more hated than an apostate.
Are you my lawyer? Yeah. Well, why don't we start with James on that one?
I definitely think that just tribalism in general does try to make apostasy the most evil act that it can, simply because that's how you maintain your numbers. And I don't know the solution to that, though, besides just trying to look beyond the surface and treat people as individuals and try to understand their perspective, and rather than just labeling them with liberal or conservative.
If I may add, there's a danger in refusing to acknowledge alternative opinions. Look at the Democratic Party right now. Look at what's happened to the left. That's what you see a collapse when there's no challenging. When you're challenged, as those of us who, and you'll kind of experience this, as we live our days challenged, we have to constantly refine our arguments. We're constantly looking backward about the choices we've made and why we make them, because we are being argued against, sometimes by both sides. And when you're not, That's when you become lazy. It's when your arguments become weak. It's when you don't go to Wisconsin, and you lose a presidential race. It's suddenly you can't debate. You can't answer those questions. You have to have them handed to you by Donna Brazile. That's the problem. But see, that is a real life, while it's interesting politically, it's the real life thing you end up having to resort to, because even Hillary Clinton, who should, with her experience, be able to answer all these questions, can't, because she's out of the habit. Her group, you don't ask each other hard questions, and you begin to atrophy. So this is where our strength comes in, is the challenge for conservatives, classical liberals like us, because we live in a world to some degree of contradiction, and almost daily we have to answer ourselves about what our positions are, and that's what makes us better people and more effective.
By the way, you gotta love Donna Brazile. She writes a book about rigging the election, and she's the one that actually rigged the election.
You got to give them credit. Yeah. So one thing about liberals,
irony is dead, people.
It's slash and burn, right? It's slash and burn. It's because it's the only thing they have.
In the back, Steve Gerza from Newton, Mass. A comment on apostasy. Apostasy in the West isn't so bad. They yell you down or they exclude you. Apostasy under Islam is called munafiqun, and the cure for that is death.
Thank you.
Well, we're getting there. We're getting there.
Well, it's good we don't have that then. Yes.
Go ahead. Hi, good morning.
Hi.
Hi. My question is for James. I loved your PragerU video, first of all, but as a former employee of Google, how do you feel about their kind of monopoly control over the information we receive?
It's definitely disconcerting, especially hearing so much of how they will try to censor YouTube or demonetize voices that they don't hear. And I think just making them realize that conservative thought isn't just evil or misinformed, that may be the best way forward. But it's definitely hard.
I was actually going to say something. Well, number one thing with Google, and this is like the terrifying part, is that they're altering the results to come back to whatever they want to sell you as their narrative. Like for me, I've done all of these things. I've had videos that had 80 million views that have gone viral. And if you Google my name, the first thing that comes up is a Salon hit piece declaring me, Candace Owens, is the new face of the toxic right. Right? Which is like, for 5 seconds I was really concerned, and then I think for the next 3 months I just laughed out loud. I mean, it's so ridiculous. The article is just so many lies. They didn't contact me. It was just an immediate hit piece. But the fact that Google runs this as if this is the number one thing that was circulated about me, it's madness, and people need to step up to the plate. I'm so happy. I wake up with every time I get upset, I always think about the fact that PragerU is suing Google, and my spirits are lifted. And people have to start stepping up to the plate and holding these people accountable, because it's a serious information war that we're in the middle of. And if these kids are getting their information on Google and Google is lying to them, okay, we have a more important issue that needs to be addressed.
Okay. Yeah. And by the way, what a rich place to have a conversation, because I know for most of you guys, you don't want government intervention to come in and stop Google, because you don't want a private company to be affected by the government. And this is where I'm a little more libertarian, as much as my own channel and my livelihood has been affected by this. But it's a great place to have a conversation and actually have a battle of ideas, which is getting increasingly harder these days.
Okay, Georgette's going to get the last question back here, and then we're going to take a short break before the next panel.
So I just want to tell you about my pet peeve. My pet peeve is that when everyone agrees at the table in the family and they say, okay, we're not going to talk politics, and then they vomit out this thing about Trump or you, anything they disagree with you about, and then they put out their hand, they go, okay, we have to stop this because we're never going to agree on anything, right? So that's actually my biggest red flag, and then I'm like, everything just breaks loose. So my question to every one of you is, this week is Thanksgiving. What are your tips before we all kill each other at the table?
I'm the wrong person to ask, 'cause I'm the one who does it. So I'm gonna.
Well, I guess first off, where do you live and can I come over for Thanksgiving? Yeah, I mean, I think we all have this, right? I would say more than anything else that actually, and maybe it's a little ironic to say to you guys on a weekend like this, but also not everything should be political all the time. Everything has become political. Sports has become political. You know, forget politics in and of itself, but media is political, Hollywood is political. This is dangerous. This is, I mean, it's, if you really believe in the individual, if you really believe in freedom, then not everything is political. It is about you and your choices. So I would try to fight, I mean, I try it all the time and I often fail. If any of you know my mom, I could really use a little help on this. But that's a good example. So my mom really does not like Trump, and we've gone through this. And by the way, I voted for Gary Johnson, and I should be judged accordingly. He actually turned me against weed because he couldn't remember anything, which I didn't.
James, do you have I'm wondering, but your family, I mean, with what you did not intend, all of us made choices. You probably had no idea. You did not intend to have this breakout.
Right.
How do you handle it since you're not on effectively a mission? You're moving through something organically. How does it affect you in those relationships, especially for Thanksgiving?
So I think really assuming good intentions is one of the best ways to diffuse these situations. So, and you know, I think you can also see how, you know, the media has portrayed me as, you know, some sexist misogynist that's just trying to hurt women, for example, and like that's the intention that they are inferring from me. But my family, for example, they know me. They know that, you know, I really love Google and I just was trying to help. And so that has really helped them just see my document for what it was.
You know, for me, there's two things that happen. One, with a group of friends where we do disagree, there's two signs we put up. One is expect the best, and the other was best intentions. So the intentions comes up. And so it's an actual visual. And we also, I have a dog walking group that I participate in. None of us bring our phones. None of us bring our phones. It not only is a distraction, but it's a reminder. It almost takes you away, even if it's not on, from the people you're with and the conversations you're having. Like right now, enjoying your stay? Do tell. 3 quick questions for our team from this hotel. Okay, so for my plan for Thanksgiving would be that there'll be no phones. There might be a couple signs up. And then it's fascinating when you're unplugged, genuinely unplugged. And there's a rule about, you know, let's do our best to stay away from politics. And it's amazing what does come up. Music, film, animals, the various pets, the things that happened at school, what you want to be doing, all these other things that in fact require and are better with an exchange. And then it takes on a life of its own. It's like surfing. You manage the wave, right? I'm originally from California. It's a harder conversation in New York. But you know you've got a parameter. You don't know where really it's going to end. It does have a life of its own, but you can manage it. But those are simple rules. And I think having everyone not put their phone in a basket at the door, and having a phone of a sign or something, a visual of expect the best, and then having maybe even a set of conversational topics that everybody agrees on overall. And I think you'll be really thrilled. You'll be surprised.
I think my family fights no matter what at every family event, so we could employ all those tactics. They're going to fight, so it might as well be about Trump. Happy Thanksgiving, guys.
Sure.